Welcome everyone to our monthly DC Grassroots Planning Coalition meeting. I am Caitlin Pachalova. I'm a staff attorney at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless and on the steering committee for the Grassroots Planning Coalition. And my lovely co-host for today is, I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, it's William Jordan, resident of Ward 1, and I'm also a member of the Grassroots Planning Steering Committee.
Great, so we are very excited to have everyone on today. It was, as many of you know, a very big week and a half in the world of the comprehensive plan, which many of us have been involved in for several years. This definitely precedes my even being here in DC. But what we're gonna do, Perry's is just getting up hopefully the slides for us, and we can go ahead and get started. The first thing that we wanted to talk about, again, as always, is just a brief refresher as to what the comp plan is and then who we are. So as we all know, hopefully on this call, but for those who are new to it, no worries, we'll catch you up to speed as best as we can. The comprehensive plan is a 1,000+ page document. Right now it's about 1,500 pages. That is a 20-year framework, which anticipates and guides development decisions across anything basically that touches the city and land use and housing and the environment, transportation, et cetera. This is a plan that's supposed to be rewritten every 20 years, and it's supposed to be amended in interim periods between then. It's usually actually about 4 years, but it depends on in practice how it actually plays out. The current plan that we are talking about was adopted by council in 2006. And it is broken into 4 different elements. So there's the framework and citywide elements. The framework was already passed a couple of years ago, and that really sets the stage for what is to come in the rest of the plan, or it's supposed to. And we will actually talk about that a bit today, just in terms of how that has actually played out. And then you also have the area elements, which are things that discuss various parts of the city. Versus the citywide elements that cover the entirety of the city. Those are things that would impact anyone in various parts of DC. The third section is the implementation and glossary. So the implementation talks about how it's supposed to be used, how the stuff should play out on the ground. The glossary was not up for amendment, but that gives a lot of the definitions that are discussed throughout the actual document. And then one of the biggest, most important parts are the maps themselves. So there's a future land use map and a generalized policy map, which again, we'll get into in more detail, but they are just these pictures and they talk about what is allowed to be developed without essentially asking for more permission from the zoning commission. So a lot of the proposed changes for the map would have a huge impact on even if the rest of the document could even be useful, because if you allow for these changes, then you kind of allow for things to happen automatically without having checks and balances. So that's hopefully a solid refresher for those of you who may be new or getting back into it. And then who are we? The Aggressors Planning Coalition is a citywide coalition of organizations and individuals who've been fighting for community-led equitable development and against harmful development that causes displacement. This group came together in 2017 after the comp plan, like during the amendment cycle when it first kind of was getting started. And we've been meeting together on a monthly basis, engaged over 1,200 residents in learning about the comprehensive plan, learning how it plays out on the ground and learning how it fits into the broader fabric of our legal system and of our land use work and housing work throughout DC. We developed the housing justice priorities and housing justice amendments, which were endorsed by over 35 organizations. And these were things that were meant to suggest changes to the Office of Planning's amended version of the comprehensive plan in order to make amendments that actually served and worked for the communities that many of us are a part of or work with intimately. They're guided by principles of racial equity, environmental justice, and equitable development. So all of the work that we've been doing has been rooted in these main principles. And again, seeing how these principles translate from paper to practice. So as stated, and as many of you know, this has been a bit of a week and a half. starting last Wednesday, we finally, after a while, and I don't say finally in terms of, that it should have happened faster. I just say finally because this has been a very long process. So last Wednesday, we received the Chairman Mendelson's updated version to the Office of Planning's amendments to the comprehensive plan. So there's this original comp plan document from 2006, Office of Planning proposed amendments last April, I believe, almost a year ago. And then the council chair and other council members have been working on it and reviewing that version to say, hey, here's what we like, here's what we don't like. And then they were to submit their own for them to discuss and mark up. So that document came out last week. We got it early. A lot of times we don't get it that early in advance, but since it's such a large document, we were fortunate to get it a bit early. From Thursday to really now and ongoing, but from Thursday, I would say through Monday, there was kind of this hyper analysis happening by many people, but a lot of people on the steering committee. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all those folks from the steering committee who have done an incredible amount of work, really staying on top of it and making sure that we all can have an understanding of what these changes mean and if they would be positive or negative. So kudos to the steering committee members and to those who are part of the Grassroots Planning Coalition who have been tracking this. That was all in preparation for Monday's briefing, which many of you may have participated in. And on Monday, we also received the racial equity impact assessment that dropped by the Council Office on Racial Equity. For many of you know, and we'll get into the details of this, CORE is a new office, and this was the first piece of legislation that they analyzed with the racial equity lens. I mean, talk about a piece of legislation to analyze first. Let's just dive right into the deep end and do the big thing. Like it's great. It's great because then we actually get to analyze, is this going to be real or is this going to be another, just an evaluation for the sake of evaluating? And I think many of us were, felt pretty good about what came out of that report because it was fairly honest. And so we'll get into the details of that. So that all happened Monday. And then on Tuesday was the actual markup which I would like to talk about now. And that is where the council members within the committee of the whole, so all 13 council members had a chance to review the committee report, which again was Chairman Mendelson's updated document and Julia Koster, who works with him, their updated version of the Office of Planning's amended comprehensive plan. So with that, let's talk a bit more about the RIA, this report that came out from the Council Office of Racial Equity and the new version of the comp plan. As you can see on the screen, this is one of the first lines of the report. And this is specifically talking about the Office of Planning's version that they proposed, the version that has been touted as something that will definitely help to ameliorate the historical racial inequities of our city and to make it so that our Black population will be able to stay and thrive. I mean, this is the rhetoric that we have been hearing. And of course, those of you who have been engaged in our work, we've been pushing back on that because it doesn't match. And it was very validating, I think, for many of us to see the Council Office on Racial Equity say in one of their first lines, as introduced, Bill 24-0001 will exacerbate racial inequities in the District of Columbia. Full stop. That's a big deal. We don't get that a lot. A lot of times it's in my opinion, I think it's a gut instinct. It's it's based on our experiences, based on the experiences of people that we work with, live by, our neighbors with. And it's not always validated by a governmental entity. So to see that in writing, first and foremost, on one of the largest pieces of legislation that we have, on the guiding document for all of planning across the city, is huge. That is a big deal. So it also talks about how some of the main reasons why they came to that conclusion are because the proposals that are being produced proposed are ahistorical. Solutions are not proportionate to racial inequities, and directives are concerningly weak or vague. A lot of that sounds like stuff that we've been talking about for the past few years. Next slide, please. So then that's the old version, I guess, the OP version. Then we have the second version, which is Mendelson's version. The CORE, the Council Office on Racial Equity, and Dr. Brian McClure did say that the Chairman Mendelson's version and the committee print makes positive changes. So perhaps the most impactful of which are to process, which means that it's not quite as bad as OP. They did some work, they incorporated some of the language, and for those of you who had a chance to look at it, and again, kudos to Julia Coster in Mendelson's office for doing her best to incorporate all the feedback from a million different people. They did incorporate specifically like racial equity language, things like that. However, CORE still indicates that even with the attempted, making that a little bit better, despite the plan's commitment to eliminating racial inequities, the document before us perpetuates the status quo. And we know what the status quo has done. It has caused the displacement of, thousands of Black residents over the past 20, 30 years. This is, if we continue business as usual, that's just going to keep on happening. That's just a fact. So regardless, on Tuesday, council members were reading through this. They were talking about it, and we'll see on the next few slides a few quotes, but they did vote on this version, the committee print version, and they passed it. 11 council members voted to pass the document. None voted against it, and 2 withheld votes. They did not vote, they just voted present, and those were Alyssa Silverman and Janice Lewis-George. Next. So what are people saying in the government about this? I mean, you can hear us talk about this all day, but what are they saying? After this came out, after the CORE came out and said, the plan you submitted was racist, it wasn't good. So Director Trueblood, who's been leading the Office of Planning, said, it can be both true that this plan doesn't do enough and that it does as much as it possibly can. You want to talk about equity and how we get there. We need more housing, and this gets us more housing. So in that way, the plan is necessary, but not sufficient. John Fulcecchio, who is leading DEMPED, the Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning and Economic Development, he's also the Mayor's Chief of Staff, said, if you don't create more housing opportunities, you create displacement. And Mendelson himself said, where we fall short is that this is just a plan, and the plan in and of itself doesn't do anything. So I don't know about that one, but for
co-host, I can't let that slide, right?
Yeah.
So the Director of Planning, Andrew Trueblood, and his staff worked and said that this comp plan is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and said, pass it right away. In fact, he said, don't read it, just pass it because we need it. And after CORE comes out and says, hey, this thing looks like it just perpetuates the status quo, will exacerbate racial inequity in the city, he gives you double speak. It's true that it doesn't do enough. When I was a kid, we watched this show called HR Pup and Stuff. I don't know if you all remember it. And it said it can't do a little, but can't do enough. And this is what we're getting from our Office of Planning. I mean, it's absolutely, disappointing. And so I just can't let us move past this double speak. I mean, this is, these are the people who are making decisions about our lives. I mean, if you want to say, look, we don't care if it's racially inequitable, but we just feel we need to get it done and we know all and we're going to move it forward, then say that. But don't give us this double speak, well, it does something, so it's okay. We have to move beyond that. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just had to say, we can't allow double speak. They need to say what they're going to say.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you stepped in, and that, for me, like, just own it. That's essentially what CORE is saying too. Until we own our history, until we own, and we're making history now. So like right now, what I just said was history because it's not this present. So like the history can be the last 20 years. It does not necessarily have to be this whole, historical, real a long time ago. It really can just be lessons learned, like own it. And then let's move forward productively. That's the only way we're going to do it, not by skirting it. And I know I'm not a politician, so that's easier for me to say. But you know, that's the reality. So let's move to the next slide, Teresa. So what are some of the council members saying? This is just a few, and two of the council members who, like I said, withheld a vote. They didn't actually vote. So Councilmember Silverman was talking about how we use our land impacts where someone can live, what access to schools, services, jobs, and amenities they can have. We know in the city there's been a deep racial divide, and a lot of it has to do with the historic biases we've had in land use and planning. Councilmember Lewis George from Ward 4 said, we cannot afford to preserve a status quo that has been displacing thousands of Black and Brown DC families. And Nadeau from Ward 1 says, what we knew from the outset, updating the comp plan alone was not going to undo generations of racist land use and other policies in the district. So I see Nancy McWood is on the call. I was going to see if Nancy would join us in this discussion. Teresa, can you help me highlight her? I'm sorry. Thanks. Hey, Nancy.
Hi, Caitlin.
I know I just chatted you, but I didn't hear back. So now you just get to come and join us.
Oh, okay.
But I would love Nancy to speak. Nancy's been part of the steering committee. She's, you know, very well informed and engaged and knowledgeable on how a lot of these planning practices play out in action, especially at the zoning commission. And so I'd love for us to just kind of start to have a brief conversation about your take on Tuesday, if you have any, what the discussion was like. And then if other folks have thoughts as well, please feel free to drop those in the chat. If we have time during this portion, we will take additional comments, but if not, hopefully we'll have time at the end. So
okay.
just to start out, Nancy, what was your impression listening to the conversation on Tuesday?
Well, I was particularly looking for some of the issue, how the different council members were responding to some of the issues that Grassroots Planning Coalition had emphasized, like displacement, definition of affordable housing, certainly racial equity that everybody wanted to talk about because of the core report. But I found it really interesting what different council members sort of emphasized and where there was agreement and where there was disagreement. For example, we talked a lot about language and whether the changes in the language that OP proposed were really going to lead to, and were really intended to prevent full participation by residents at the zoning commission or other land use regulatory processes. And it was interesting because council members Lewis George and also council member Silverman on Tuesday raised concerns about the vagueness of language. Council member Che said the opposite. She thought the inflexibility of language that had been changed by Chairman Mendelson to make the language more directive was a concern. And both council members Silverman and Bond said the language really has to be clear. There was some talk among several council members about displacement. Council members Bonds, Robert Wright, Nadeau, among others, all specifically mentioned displacement, but not in the context of offering any amendments. Nobody offered any amendments. There didn't seem to be, from my perspective, a real grasp of what the document is going to do and how it's actually going to affect people. There were a number of council members who wanted to have further conversations with Chairman Mendelson. Councilmember Bond said she wanted to talk about affordability. Councilmember Lewis George wants to have more discussion about the definition of affordable housing. Robert White said he wanted to have more discussion about protecting the language in one of the neighborhood policy sections about protecting a rich historical and cultural legacy. Councilmember Henderson and also Councilmember Silverman talked about this section 20503.2, which I don't know how many people are focusing on that, but it actually does pertain to the council's understanding of how the future land use map amendments are going to affect the zoning process. This 205, the section 20503, which I'll stop with this, is a really curious section. What the Office of Planning has done is they have outlined, encircled 9 different areas in the city on the generalized policy map. And they have said, in most of these areas, we are recommending FLUM changes. There's going to be an increase either in increase in density, maybe increases or changes in the use. Could have a big impact on the surrounding communities. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a planning process after the FLUM amendments are approved. This is a totally backwards planning process. And what I think is very significant and people have to understand is once the FLUM amendments are approved, they are baked in. No amount of planning after the fact is going to change the density that has been approved or the uses that have been approved. So these planning processes, which the Committee of the Whole staff report or version of the comp plan amendments has further amended. It's not a small area plan that is that is intended. It could be a PUD if the land use owner says, okay, I got the FLUM amendment approved. Now I'm going to go and ask for a PUD. That would be enough to satisfy this planning requirement. Or it could be a design plan or a framework plan or a master plan or some sort of a technical plan. It's very uncertain and unpredictable exactly what it means. But I think what's really important to understand is whatever planning process might be implemented by the Office of Planning, and it's subject to funding by the council, it is going to be how to manage whatever the FLUM amendment approvals are. So it's not going to be the community can go in and say, really, we really didn't have medium density in mind. We really would prefer to have moderate density and we really want to have more housing than commercial or vice versa. That discussion is over. Once these FLUM amendments are approved, what you can do is maybe you could determine there need to be some infrastructure improvements, or the design needs to include some step downs, or you're going to be talking around the core of what's already been approved. And I think it's very important for people to understand this, because I think even the council, certainly Office of Planning, is presenting this as if this is going to be a fully engaged and comprehensive planning process prior to rezoning. It is going to be prior to rezoning, but it is not going to change the Zoning Commission's responsibility, obligation to make sure that whatever zoning they approve is not inconsistent with the comp plan. And that's going to be these FLUM amendments.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining with that very insightful, observations from Tuesday. And I think it highlights the importance of planning in advance, like actual planning. So a lot of times, from my experience, from what we have seen, we see plans and things be created, but then they're not actually revisited, retouched. They're not internalized. They're not acted upon. And so it just continues to perpetuate the same things and then allow for more and more. Like, people oftentimes are forward looking. We're always saying, well, we'll improve it. It'll be better without looking back. How are you you can't do that. And I think that gets into our next discussion. And Teresa, if you don't mind taking Nancy off the spotlight, I'm going to turn this over to William so that we can talk about this core report, because as we said, 11 council members still voted for this because it may be better, but we still know that what is on the table right now will continue to perpetuate a status quo that displaced at least 40,000 Black folks within like a 10 to 20 year period. And that is low. And so William is going to talk more about that. What does this core analysis actually mean? What does structural racism actually mean?
So what we wanted to try to do is to first share some highlights we pulled from the core report and the analysis that it did and the approaches that it took, and then begin to look at trying to understand what it really means. So we're in a city where we talk a lot, but we don't really boil things down to what it really means. I think that's what we just finished discussing. What happens when you change the flow, but what does that really mean for the people who live around that change? What happens when you change zoning? And so the core, they stated that our analysis evaluates policies using a groundwater approach. The groundwater approach aims to treat systems, not just problems at an individual level. The approach is grounded in 3 ideas. The white supremacy ideology operates the same across systems. Socioeconomic differences does not explain racial inequity, and inequities are caused by systems, regardless of the people and culture or behavior. And I think this is what we really want to start to get into. The comp plan actually speaks to what kind of systems we have and those we want in the future. Where we put, and so that's the discussion. I know many a times we're looking for the good guy versus the bad guy. Who's doing right and who's doing wrong, but we have to look at what's really being structured in our city. Next slide. The report talks about structural and institutional racism has led to stark inequalities between Black residents and white residents in our city. And so then it goes down into focusing on, I think, something that we really want to drill down into. When we hear our council members talk, we don't really focus on what has happened over the last 20 years that's driving policy. We want to look at what happened in the 1950s and the 1960s and 70s, and that led up to where we are. But we also have to look at what policies have occurred when the council members who we have were in charge, when the mayors who we know today were in charge. And so the core report points out that at least 20,000 Black residents have been displaced from the city, that the poverty rate since 2006 for Black residents has increased, not gone down while the city was booming, that jobs and schools have become more segregated, not less segregated, since 2006. So, and it goes on to talk about since the COVID-19 virus, that not only that it exposed what has happened over the last 20 years when the city was booming, but it has exacerbated the inequities. Next slide. So these are the things that the core report is pulling out. So one of the things we want to talk about today when we talk about that core has called out is that the bill that OP presented, our Office of Planning, says lacks honest historical narrative and provides a selective view of the present, right? So in other words, our comp plan has made up recent history, and CORE called them out. We're basing our policy on a history that's really not fully true. Also, a point that CORE breaks out is that the comp plan's policies are race neutral, aiming to improve outcomes by providing the same tools and resources to everyone, despite the deep and persistent racial inequity. So how do you solve a problem of racial inequity when you won't focus on the problem? You just use general responses. You get what we have today, which is no progress. And so go on to the next slide, please. And then the CORE begins to look at the process uses. And so I just want to highlight a couple of these, but one is reinforces structural racism by reporting aggregate data and concealing racial inequities. So we see this a lot. We talk about median household incomes. We're talking about median this, median that, which gives you an idea, but it really doesn't break down how policies drill down and affect people, groups, and subgroups. And one of the things CORE is calling out is that, again, we're not making policy by looking at the data, disaggregating, seeing how particular policies affect Black populations or Latino populations or whoever, because we're not even looking at that data. And CORE is saying that the council and the comp plan needs to drill down to see how things are really happening. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of the points I wanted to bring out, is that what CORE and what we're doing, and part of what we have to do, we have to counter the ahistoric nature of our current policies from the mayor. And we heard it from council members such as Nate Dove. So when you talk about traditional redlining, which occurred, 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, that's true. It has impacted policies. It has impacted how Ward 3 developed, but it also impacted how Ward 1 developed. The same redlining occurred in all parts of the city, not just in Ward 3. But we don't want to look at what happened since 1998 as the control board restructured the city and the policies that followed after that. And so our council members, the mayor, and what's happened to date really depends on a lot what happened since then. We know what happened in the past, but actually in the past, there's actually been mixed results, right? Many Blacks became homeowners in this city during a period of time when redlining existed. And those same residents or those same families lost homes since redlining has been sort of over since 1998 through today. So we have to really drill down to see what's really happened with policy. Next slide. So one of the things I wanted to do is just, to challenge the ahistoric narrative and go through some of the critical points that happen in our city that many of us either gloss over, forgot about, or we just think that one day the city's budget was great and people wanted to move here, that nothing happened, that displacement wasn't structurally put in place before it happened. So I just pulled out a few things. So when the control board was in, one of the deals that was cut is the city lost its federal payment. And in exchange for that, the federal government took over prisons, the courts, and long-term pension liabilities that helped bring the city into better balance financially. So, Jack Evans and everybody likes to talk about how they balance the budget. Well, there was a structural change that put them in a place to be able to do that. It was also during that time that the CFO office was created in the city, And actually the federal government began transferring federal lands that the city didn't control to city control. In 1996, began the Hope 6 era in this city. Now, that was the first wave of major displacement since the urban renewal days in the 50s and the 60s. So you wanted to know how many people were displaced, you have to go back and see that displacement began with the Hope 6 era. In 1998, charter schools became more prominent in the city. Now, what did charter schools really do? You know, it's about education and blah, blah, blah. But also what charter schools were designed to do is to separate land value from the value and the quality of education in local schools. So, you know, traditionally, local schools kind of drove the value of land in your community. But if you go to charter schools and away from neighborhood schools, you disconnected to, which allows the land value to rise without necessarily addressing education. In 1998, the TIF laws and the downtown TIFs, which was way the city was going to use to finance development, came into back. Now, here's one thing. In 1999, the city wrote to HUD and went to uncapped limits on Cdbg resources. Now, what does that mean? That was the point in time where what the definition of affordability changed in the district, right? It gave the city the right to change affordability as it related to land, as well as money that the city received from the federal government. And specifically at the time, it used to be that at least 70% of, if you were going to displace or privatize public land that had been bought or under control of Cdbg rules, that at least 70% of that land and its use had to apply benefits to people making 70% of AMI and below, right? After you uncapped, it flipped the model so that only 30% applied to people who made 30% made 70 and below, and it flipped it around so that market rate projects could benefit from Cdbg land. And then they went further to a 2080 model. So that land that was in city control that got developed, only 20% had to be affordable or address affordability concerns. But the landmark, I think, piece that I wanted to hit was in 2003 is when the 100,000 new resident policy kicked in the district. And this is when...
Well, who are the people responsible for making that 2080 rule? Give us some names.
They're all on the council, right? So what is 2020 is, that's who was mayor then. Williams, who was on the council then. Jim Graham, Jack Evans, Chairman Mendelson, you name it. But that's when the council decided that in order to develop in the city, in the mayor, that we needed to attract market rate people and market rate housing. And that if you wrote down the value of the land and gave it to a developer for $10, $1, or a cheap price, that developer would develop the property, would not need any city subsidy, and would make at least 20% of what did affordable, okay? All of those projects then came back to the city for new resources. Then we all know later on that Michelle Rhee came in to fix our education system. Harriet Triconi came in to fix our planning and bring in smart growth philosophies. And the other big thing at that time is all of the land that was in the city shifted from being controlled by an outside entity or broader and went to the real estate development office in DNPED. And that's where we are today, where DNPED controls most of the land and et cetera in the city. And then the last thing I'll hit from this slide, if you go back and check the housing data in the city, it is since 2013, the price of housing has doubled in almost every neighborhood in the city. And it is, so that is when Mayor Bowser took over the Economic Development Committee and Council. Most of the council members who are on council today were in power. And it's at this point that displacement became permanent because the land became too expensive and the housing became too expensive as a result of public policy on the watch of current council members and current policymakers. So I just wanted to make that point that this isn't some mystery that occurred back in the 50s and 60s alone, that we're dealing with a comp plan that is speaking to current policies. Next slide. So again, attacking the ahistoric narrative, I just put here some reports that we can share, people can look at. I'll just call out two. In here, there's a report that the city likes to refer to that speaks about if you build more housing, the cost of rents will go down. And there's truth. That is truth, or I would say there's truth to that theory. However, when they did the study, they found that if the mayor's program goes forward, the average rent in the city will go from, or the median rent will go from about $3,300 or so per month down to $3,100 per month if her program is successful. So the question is a rent of $3,100 a month relevant to most people in the city, when most people in the city, particularly lower income people, can barely pay $1,500 a month, and that's high. And then the other report is the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which looked at the years from 2006 to 2011 and really began to talk about the impacts of gentrification on the city. And a couple of things came out of that report that I guess we've ignored. One is that it looked at how gentrification impacts formerly Black neighborhoods, that the gentrification brings short-term integration, but over time resegregates those communities, right? And it also talks about the creation of a dual housing market. One housing market that is primarily white and Hispanic, and another housing market which will be primarily Black. And this is where we are today, that Blacks on average can only afford to stay in this city under affordable housing programs, but those affordable housing programs always restrict your rise in income and your ability to build wealth. And at the end of the day, it compounds or frustrates racial equity because it compounds the gap. And then the last one, it talks about large family size units report. And so these reports, I suggest everyone at least glance through. Next slide. And again, the point of all of this is to begin to talk about structural racism. I won't go into all of these charts, but just to let you know they exist. And this chart begins to look at the need for 3-bedroom units, family size units. And I think anyone in the city who knows people understand that particularly for the Black community, that the way the Black community was able to make progress in income as well as wealth in the city, even though the gap is large, is by leveraging family. Multi-generational households, networks of family that live nearby, so you can drop your child off or go to for other resources. Well, we're losing that housing stock and you're breaking up families. And that's part of what we're seeing is causing the inequities in the city. So these are just some charts. Next chart, or the next slide. Again, it makes the point that the need, we all agree we need new housing, right? But the city wants to build more luxury, one bedroom and efficiency housing, but the charts show the need is for family size units from 30 below up to about 80 and 50 below range. We need family size units. Yes, we need more housing, but the city is building the opposite housing. The policies are designed to build the opposite housing that's needed to create racial equity. So this is how you get to structural bias, structural racism, because we have a policy that's being enshrined in the comp plan that says we are going to build high-end housing at smaller bedroom sizes where the need is multiple larger bedroom sizes at the lower end. Next slide. And I won't go into this slide deeply, but this shows what it means when you disaggregate data. So each one of these lines, either on the left or more so on the right. So the green line on the right shows the Black population in the city, what income range they're primarily in. So you can see, if you can see the little green up where income is very high, the Black population in that range is less than 1%, is almost zero. And then you see that line go almost in a vertical line pointing down, but it's going up where you get to lower income areas. And again, you can see where we're building housing that targets people from 75K up to 200K, where there are almost no Black families that fit that description, or the number is low, right? And then at the lower end, when there's a demand and need, we're limiting under the 2080 model to only building 20% on DC government land when it comes down to it, almost none multiple bedrooms, above 3 bedrooms. But under IZ, that number is 10% at best, and even under IZ plus, it may get to 20, but there's always trade-offs. So, but this is how, if you're doing good planning and good policy, this is how you need to look at the data. Next slide. And again, this is won't go into it, but this is disaggregated data. The city has it. So council members can know it's not just about building housing, it's building housing that makes sense using these charts and graphs where you can see how housing would typically impact a Black household, a white household, Latino household, high income, low income, family size, and mix it all together. You can't just say the average is this or the median is that and think you're going to make good policy. And this is what CORE is really saying. You have to drill down to this kind of level. Next slide. So that ends my piece, but I just wanted to leave with a couple points. I would suggest everyone read the CORE report, that you study it and be prepared to really push council and mayor to explain if the report is telling you that your plan doesn't address racial inequity. And the council members are quoted as saying, well, it's just a plan, it doesn't matter. We need legislation. We need other things. Well, we need to ask them soon where the other things are, because we're at a point where we can't wait for 2026 to rewrite the plan and incorporate racial equity into our planning, nor into our policy. We're in an emergency. 5 years from now, at least another 50,000 Black residents will be gone. And the point may be moot at that point. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, William. All right, so now we are going to move into what does this mean? How does this play out on the ground in practice for communities? And first, I'm going to turn it over to another steering committee member, Chris Williams, to begin talking about, again, what does this mean in practice and what are we going to do about it? And then we'll get Ms. Elliot from Brooklyn Manor to talk about her experience as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. As has been mentioned, the Council on Racial Equity has issued their racial equity impact assessment. And what I want to highlight in my series of slides here is the importance of land use. And so that report aimed to provide guidance on how land use decisions impact communities of color. It is really that central question of land use that really is at the heart of whether or not we're going to move equity forward as a city. Further in their report, they talk about the importance of land use in all aspects of social and economic well-being. Okay, and so it influences housing prices, housing choice, rent burden, access to transit, commute time. So it's the axis around which everything is rotating. I am the editor-in-chief for the Southwest Voice, a community newspaper in Southwest, and we made this very statement before the racial impact assessment came out, that subsequent changes to the plan will provide little relief to Southwest if they do not impact the specific application to land use. And this applies citywide, okay? And so that's really where we are. Also, Phil Mendelson, who is the chair of DC Council, has said in multiple stakeholder meetings that only the zoning related policies in the comprehensive plan are legally enforceable. So as much as we get a lot of language around racial equity, preventing displacement, really our attention should be focused on land use. And so that's what I'll be talking about specifically today, land use. As it's been mentioned that we have a couple of maps that we should really focus on. The first one, the one you see here on your screen, is a future land use map. And so when we talk about upflumming, right? So those are all of these spaces on the map that have the black dots. And so basically they're saying is that you're going to go from this amount of density and we're going to increase it to this amount of density for you to put a very large building there, okay? The other map that's also important, I'll be talking about this map a little bit later, is the generalized policy map. So here's another map that's really important. So it's about land use. And what makes the comp plan so important is because of what it is trying to do. So we are looking at the approval of 200 million square feet for commercial and residential development. That is approximately estimated to be in value $85 billion. That's why we are so concerned that the comp plan is a racist document that is increasingly, that our city council members want to say we should pass. We should just pass and let $85 billion of real estate development go with this plan. And meanwhile, our communities of color, our brown and Black communities are left in the lurch. Let's look at some of the language that is currently in the draft. And I want to make a critical assessment and then we'll get into solutions. So this has been talked about. Several of our speakers today have talked specifically about this, that there shall be a process for the zoning commission to evaluate all actions through a racial lens as a part of the comprehensive plan. And this is great. This is actionable. This is something that the zoning commission will have to do. But what's the problem? The problem is that it allows for a preparation period, which could take years, and it's not immediate. And so it says to prepare and implement tools. What does that mean? It's rather vague. So will we see any change in the next year with respect to zoning commission cases? It's not really clear. The other question is the comprehensive plan doesn't tell the zoning commission what to do when it looks at these cases through a racial equity lens. And I can tell you our experience in Southwest is that when we have raised these issues of equity, because it's in fact in our small area plan that we should strive to be an equitable neighborhood, what we have gotten from the zoning commission is that there are other competing, more important priorities, namely the building of more housing. So even though we have this wonderful passage that specifically applies to land use and how the zoning commission shall make their decisions, it nevertheless has a number of areas that are very problematic, and it doesn't really guarantee that we'll see any change in the status quo. Let's look at another passage. This passage, let's see here. This passage concerns growth through an equity lens must address and reduce existing racial inequities resulting from systematic racism, etc. It's a great line. There's no question about it. But what's the problem? The problem that it's not enforceable because it doesn't specifically apply to land use decisions of the zoning commission, okay? The other problem is that it's not a policy or an action within the comprehensive plan. What's another problem? The same problem that I mentioned before, which is that the zoning commission has consistently prioritized the production of more housing, even when they know that it will exacerbate gentrification and racial inequity. So we need to talk solutions. And so let's look at one solution that could help us specifically around land use to further racial equity. Nancy had mentioned that there are a number of drawbacks in essentially passing a flum change, meaning that I can go from low density to high density without a small area plan. And that is absolutely true what Nancy said. That's sort of backwards planning. You want to have a neighborhood plan first and then have everything align with that. But this does provide us an opportunity to further equity, and I want to explain why. Those areas on the map that fall under the implementation section 2503.2 are that generalized map that I mentioned earlier has little red sections. You may barely be able to see them, but they have these little red sections. And for those little red sections, you need, in order to proceed with zoning changes, you need a small area plan, a technical study, a design guidelines, or a PUD in order to proceed with development. This could allow for more community-centered development, and we believe that the district should expand the number of areas in the city that have to go through this kind of process. Let's get to another solution. We believe that we are in such an emergency around Black displacement that just as you saw on the map, all the lines designating this and putting this neighborhood over there in a different color, we believe that the time is now to designate areas of high displacement risk and frankly, housing racism. So these are areas of acute displacement where there is perpetuation of structural housing inequity, including housing inequity that our very government has put into place. And so a lot of these projects are public projects that are or heavily subsidized by the government. And we need to identify what areas are really at risk of putting us further away from racial equity. And we can do that. And that's fully the prerogative of the DC Council to designate such areas. So one example is Southwest. We've seen that as public projects like the Wharf have come on board, the Black population has barely gone up. We've seen a more than doubling of the white population on account of that and other public projects in Southwest. But Southwest is not the only area. We have Brooklyn Manor, Park Morton, Congress Heights, Navy Yard, Anacostia. This is just a small list, a small number of examples of where we could designate emergency hot zones. And so what that would require, and please forgive all the text on the screen, but that would require immediate freezing of all new development approvals. Why? Because it's likely that these developments are violating the fair housing laws. Why? Because we want to prevent Black displacement and brown displacement. Why? Because we are trying to aim for a more equitable city. So allowing that $85 billion that I mentioned of real estate to go through without saying, okay, we need to pause, we need to stop, we need to realign our priorities, it would be useless not to have this kind of actionable policy within the comprehensive plan. And it doesn't require subsequent legislation. The council could put this language in now. So in these hot zones, you don't have, you take a pause. And during that pause, you look at, well, what's all the development we've approved in the last 10 years? What's the market? What's the affordable? What does it look like? Who has moved in terms of race, in terms of age, in terms of disability in these new units? And is there an imbalance? Are we, by the way, in compliance with all district and federal fair housing laws in this particular area or for this particular development? I'll tell you this. I know that the Office of Attorney General has a lot of interest in what is going on in Southwest. And I can almost be certain that there are fair housing violations going on, not only in my community, but in many communities that you're familiar with. So this time to pause and take stock of everything will be very important. And further, it says, okay, once we start approving new developments, everything is going to seek to achieve racial equity. And moreover, the Zoning Commission will get flexibility to be able to require more affordable housing, which the Zoning Commission, by the way, a case in Southwest recently did this. They recently asked the developer to put in more affordable housing because of concerns about Black displacement. So we know that the Zoning Commission can do this, and they have exercised the rights to do this. The other piece that's important is that the Zoning Commission should regularly consult with the Office of Attorney General. I'll tell you this because I recently had to email both the Office of Attorney General and the Zoning Commission about a particular case that I was concerned where it violated DC law. And so the Office of Attorney General will weigh in on that case. But the Zoning Commission really needs more help to understand all of the legal pitfalls. The third idea is that the DC Council is saying that the Zoning Commission has to do this racial equity analysis. But as I said, it doesn't tell them what to do with the findings. It doesn't say, okay, if you get this, then do this. So the Zoning Commission could continue to do what it has previously done, which is to say, we acknowledge that there could be a race disparate impact or displacement. but we believe that the comprehensive plan says we should build more. This is what it has basically said. And so what we're recommending is that they should not approve, the zoning commission, any development that will moderately or severely displace residents or create a racial disparate impact. This gives the DC Council statement on racial equity for the zoning commission, this gives it teeth, this gives it meaning, and it really furthers racial equity and housing fairness. We also believe that the zoning commission should broadly consult with the Office of Attorney General to, again, assess adherence with federal and DC laws, including fair housing laws. And then also require that the Office of Planning provide a statement on compliance with the Fair Housing Act. We know that there is a preliminary report that DHCD has published. And in that report, they've said this. They've said that the district does not seek adherence with the Fair Housing Act. What a statement. What a statement. And so the Office of Planning has a responsibility to assess its approval of these developments through the Fair Housing Act. This is federal law, this is district law, and the Office of Planning should do a better job. What are we saying in all of this? We are saying stop. Stop the racist planning, stop the displacement, stop the fair housing violations, and stop the attack on families. So what we've put forward are very reasonable recommendations on how we can give meaning to the comprehensive plan, so-called aim to further racial equity in the district. And I'll leave it at that. I see that there are a lot of comments in the chat, so happy to take questions. And so I'll turn it back to you, Caitlin. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. So now I'm gonna bring up Miss Elliot and Miss High. Getting better at this spotlighting.
Hello, everyone. I want to
Miss Elliot, just one brief second. I want to make sure we can get everyone up. Actually, Parisa, can you help me with that? To bring Miss High onto this panel as well.
Okay.
All right, so I will let you both introduce yourselves, and yeah, we'll start with Miss Elliot.
Hello, I'm Minnie Elliot at Brooklyn Manor, of course, and I want to thank you all for having me. I'm kind of filled up with all of hearing all these things, and a lot of the things you all are talking about, I agree wholeheartedly, because we're here at Brooklyn Manor and we've been fighting for this property over 20 years. If you really want to know, that's when we went into existence as resident association. Our problem is that we have a lot of people that sit on the board that are older people. I even came out of retirement. I'm 83, and I'm out there marching and carrying on even now when I should be retired and have a lot of young people out here. And the reason why I feel so really concerned about the property here is because Eugene Ford Sr., I knew him personally. And when he owned the property, he was on the verge of losing this property when everybody here got together and formed a resident association in order to help him save this property. During that time, he always said that his son, Junior, was never interested in affordable, but he did make a commitment that people would be able to live here and their families in a training program, and they would even be able to build in place, which we know now is not true. My biggest thing is we're going through a lot of the problems and we have right now, but you got to remember the government is mixed into a lot of this. You got McDuffie, you got the mayor, and you got Menderson. Menderson done walked here. Even Graves done been out of here. Graves even brought us a lawyer out here to try to, he said to save the property, but it was something different. He flipped over. So it's kind of hard to really trust people when you hear all these things and everything else. I come from the old school. My thing is, I say, take it to the street. Everybody doing all this talking, whatever it is, they took it to the streets when they wanted go-go. But if you have go-go without the Black folks, they're not going to even be here to enjoy. And you're talking about statehood. Statehood, how are you going to have statehood when you got a lot of the people of color and in slavery? You understand what I'm saying? They don't look at it like that, but I look at it like that. You got tent cities going up all over DC. This is supposed to be the richest place here, but you even can't even get jobs. You got young people that took the training programs out. You got people coming from all over doing the developments in here. What about the 51% that they say that the people of DC are supposed to be able to have jobs? I mean, what happens with all of this? You have schools that are in Ward 1 and 2 with everything the kids need during this problem we're having. But over in our Ward 5, we don't have it. So when I listen to all of this and the lines and the rules and the regulations and everything else, I said that we need to take it to the street. And if you want to make a big difference, you need to march on it. If I'm willing to march on it with a cane and a lot of my older people can do the same, I think that's what we need to do. What they have done in DC, they have divided and they have conquered. Once before, you used to have open things where everybody all over Washington, DC were able to voice their opinion or whatever it is. We're putting people in places that's making decisions for people that we know it does not mean anything to them. So you want to know how we doing over here? We really doing a little bit better. And that's because we've had a lot of volunteers that have joined us. I mean, these are young people with different programs and things that have came in here. We had people who have donated food to us. I mean, this Mid-City got plenty of money. And they say they did all these things, but that was us that did that. I mean, I got a 3-bedroom apartment. I had things stacked up, water, different things that my seniors needed. They took them for the shots and everything else over here. So no, I said, you have to do the grassroots. If you want to make a difference, you got to pull out the foundation in order to get to the top. That's all I have to say. If you want to question me, it's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Elliott. Ms. Hyman, a minute, and then may I ask both of you one question.
Mm-hmm.
Repeat the question.
I didn't have one yet. I just gave you the floor.
Oh, I'm Ms. Shantae High. I'm the president of the council at Park Morton over in Ward 1. Hey, Ms. Elliott. And I'm also a supporter of the Brooklyn Manor Tenants Association. I'm helping them to fight their good fight. I'm in all the fights. I'm gonna tell you, I'm in all the fights.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to let you know, we just had a lot of volunteers that just left now while I'm on here talking to you. We got them out in the neighborhood passing out flyers, taking pictures and all that. And these are people that volunteer. They work every day, but they come over here and volunteer for me.
That's what's up, Miss Elliott. I'm a big supporter of equity. I just recently helped with the Brooklyn Manor Equity Plan. Spinning off of the Park Morton Equity Plan because our Black and brown families, we need a stake in our communities.
That's right.
It's hard to have lived in this community at Park Morton for 20 years. Now, I have to tell you, I have grown up in DC with having aunts, uncles, my grandmother, in DC. I don't know if y'all know about Change Incorporated.
Yes.
Y'all know about Change, so y'all know and Gracie Rowland.
Pick two. PIC.
So Gracie Rowland is my grandmother. So if y'all know about Change, y'all know about Gracie. Gracie is my grandmother. So y'all know she was in the fight. So y'all know the fight was already bred into me. So I grew up in Ward 1. So y'all know that Ward 1 is my home and I want to stay here. And so knowing that this fight is already in me, it's hard to let it go. It's hard to turn the other cheek. And it's hard to say, coming out of a family that has owned a stake in equity, has owned homes, has owned businesses, it's hard to say that I don't want to have that. And now that I am a business owner, I own High Alert Emergency Preparedness. And one of the people that I prepared for this pandemic is on this call right now. Mr. William Jordan can tell you, I prepared him for this pandemic, him and his family. You know, another one, Mr. Otten, Chris Otten. I prepared Chris Otten for this pandemic. Mr. Otten, can you verify that in the chat, please? So yes, I have two people that can verify that my business prepared them for this pandemic. And I can let y'all know that I have 60 certifications in what I do. So come on, y'all. I'm the best at what I do. And I need a stake in where I live. I need to make sure that my children and I can keep providing for my community. Y'all are my family. I need to be here for y'all. I need to be here to, well, we have 147 units at Park Morton. And at the time DC Housing Authority started moving us out of here, they've already moved 93 of us out of here. 147 units, 93 of us already gone. So if you hear my voice start cracking, it's because I get emotional. I'm attached to my families and it hurts to see them go. So, you know, please bear with me. You know, I love deep, y'all. So when I get attached to y'all and I fight for y'all, I fight with my whole heart. You know what I'm saying? So.
Thank you, Shauna.
You're welcome. And just know that I'm here. I'm here when I fight for you. I'm here.
Thank you, Ms. High. The one question that I wanted to ask you, both of you, is, and if you can answer in like 1 or 2 sentences, that would be great. If you were the head of planning for this city that you both know and love intimately so well, what is the main priority that you think needs to happen in order to make the city that you both know it can be?
Investments in people. That's number 1. Investments in people and investments in small businesses.
My priority would be to start over again and make it so that Black and brown people will be able to live here in the city and have decent jobs. Not so much bringing out other people outside and stop so much of the development. I like development, but who are you doing that for? You're not doing it for the people here in the city, not the brown and brown, because they don't even, half of them don't even have jobs. So I would say, just what Sean say, put more investment in people, education, medical, all of it's tied together.
Thanks, Ms. Elliott. Thanks, Ms. High. And I mean, this is it. The fights that both of you have been engaged in for so many years is the result of planning that has explicitly excluded your communities. And that's not right, for all the reasons you said. And there are solutions, which you just named. So that's exactly what we're trying to fight for, making sure that Black and brown communities, Black communities are really taken care of and invested in and shown that they are this city, like they are DC. You all are DC. So thank you both for being here, for answering my impromptu question. And we love you, we support you, and we're excited to win this fight together. That's how we're gonna do it. So next.
Yeah, this is
welcome, thank you.
I wanted to piggyback off of what they said is, or I think is a key point. Ms. Elliot and Ms. High are assets to this community. They're assets to who we are. You know, we kind of want to look at people, low-income people or so-called low-income people, and look at it as something we don't want to invest in. As Ms. Elliott said, that we think the solution is outside of us, that somehow we can attract people in and they'll bring it all. But it's really, I won't say it's the opposite, but and people here have more to offer. And actually, from an investment standpoint, investing $10,000 in Ms. High's business will definitely create more of a return than investing $1 million with P. and Hoffman. They waste that at the wharf. I mean, just from a regular business standpoint, these people are assets to our community, and we've been underinvesting. And this comp plan is trying to enshrine to continue uninvesting. That's what racial inequity really means. We're only investing in one type of person or one model, and we're not investing across the board in an equitable manner in other models that make this city grow and that make us grow. And that's the point we're trying to get across the council, right? It's a broad-based investment. Just saying you're going to create more housing is not the same as investing in the people who are in that housing. That's just the baseline. You get people in housing that they can afford. Why? It frees up the rest of their time and income to contribute to the city. Investing in affordable housing is not a way to warehouse people. It's to unleash what they have to bring. And that's the missing part in this comp plan, because unfortunately, many of our city leaders just don't believe, they have an ahistoric look and don't understand that we have a lot to offer in this city, because they're listing and they're part of a historic narrative that never existed. They made it up, and they made it up because they don't want to take responsibility of what they've been responsible for the last 20, 15, 10 years. And you hear it in the councils, and you hear it in the mayor's explanations of things. If somebody did it, my grandparents did it. It happened before I got on watch. And we're saying, no, it happened on your watch, and you must partner with us and the residents of the city for solutions. So that's all my speechifying.
You know what? One thing I agree when we talked about the hot zone and taking a pause on a lot of these things on the development until it's studied. And I think that's true. And I think we should really go after the point about the $85 billion and try to stop them from spreading around. Because when you follow the money, you really follow a lot of the facts and who's playing shortstop with each other. We all know there is a lot of violations with fair housing. Maybe that should be studied too. These are some of the things that we should concentrate on, really.
Yeah, and to that point, in one of William's initial slides from earlier, he lists out a bunch of the reports that have definitively said we're not doing what we need to do to get there. So the research is already there. It's there, it's just not being listened to. And the thing is that's been so beautiful, I think, about this space is we're forcing their hand, because more and more people get it now. More of us on this call have been empowered enough to reach out to them and say, what are you doing? Like, are you not reading this? Like, why aren't you implementing this? Because we know that it's not working out the way that you say it's supposed to. So I 100% agree with that. is there any final thoughts from this panel before we go to the next section? Well, thank you both again for grounding this in the realities. And yeah, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to bring two more of our steering committee members back to the table, Chris Otten and Renee Bowser. And let's see, give us 1 minute, and then I'm going to turn it back over to William to help with this. Awesome. Hey, Chris. Hey, Renee.
Hi.
So Chris and Renee have done an amazing job. Like we said at the beginning, the kudos to the steering committee members who really jumped on this right away and got to analyzing. And so they're going to do a slightly deeper dive for us into a few of the provisions that we've been focusing on. But like I said, I'm turning it back over to William to help with this section.
So I think what we kind of want to do is to try to get into, there's a lot of mythologies or partial truths that we kind of want to get our handle around. And I think first I wanted to talk to, both Chris and Renee are very studied on the issue, so either one can drop in. But I wanted to start with the whole concept of, we're gonna unleash this $200 million in new square footage, right, into the city. And most of this will be by allowing larger buildings to be built, right? We'll allow larger buildings to be built. So we're going to add by going up primarily, but it also impacts because we are allowing buildings to go wider, right? So when you go wider, you take away public space or the usable space that people normally. So if you notice with a lot of projects, it's a little bit of sidewalk and a huge building. There's no space to operate and be community in because every space is being used in project. The second is we go higher in order to build more affordable units, but at the same time, those units become more expensive to build and have an impact on the community around them. So I really wanted to just kind of throw that out there. What are we really getting? And is this density that we're getting out of comp plan, is it really going to create more affordable housing, or is it just making housing more expensive? I didn't know if anyone wanted to speak to that.
Who are you pointing to on this one? Renee, do you want to take this on, or you? Okay. Well, look, William, good question. I mean, I encourage everybody. Again, this is Chris Otten. I'm former ANC commissioner in Adams Morgan. I've been living in Adams Morgan for 21 years, and I've seen the drastic changes that have led to the displacement of Ward 1. We're now in our third gentrification wave. So even the wealthy people that moved in are being pushed out by even more wealthy people, right? And the inducement of these waves of gentrification is brought on by, as Chris Williams pointed out, land use policies. For example, in Adams Morgan, a giant luxury hotel got zoning relief, got $42 million in DC tax break, right? And I want to point back to Miss Elliot in Brooklyn Manor, got a $50 million tax break there. So the city is pushing policy, pushing money to build more of what? We all know what we're seeing with our own eyes. We don't need to be experts in land use policy. We're seeing, as you said, William, big, large boxes right up to the sidewalks, straight face on line, 6, 7, 8, 9 stories tall. Go to Union Market. Tell me about while the developer class and the mayor and the developer advocates, the growth advocates point to Ward 3 and say, look at that historic segregation up there. We need to do something about it. Look at that shiny ball up there, while they build out Union Market to be a brand new, segregated, exclusive community that only wealthy single professionals can afford. No mention of parks, no mention of clinics, no mention of libraries. I mean, literally a playground for the rich, only the rich. And even if those people want to move there, I mean, I don't even know who would want to live in that type of community. However, that is what's being pushed now. We've been accused of there's a pernicious rumor that we got it wrong, that, the comp plan isn't racist. Well, actually, we've been proved right on that. Well, also with the upflumming, what does upflumming mean? It means the status quo. It means more of the same posture, that bigger, denser buildings of luxury housing will somehow solve our affordable housing crisis. No planning involved there. No matter what class of people move into these large, big buildings that are going to be going up and down the corridors, perhaps, no matter what class of people moves in there, it's people. More people means more use of the buses, more kids going to the schools, more use of the parks, more use of. Has there been any planning around that posture of build more? Absolutely not. Again, Union Market, Navy Yard, these are all real cases. Now, I don't want to get into, there's been a lot of technical jargon today. Chris Williams really summed it up well in his presentation. But the real story, as Ms. High and Ms. Elliot pointed out, are the people. So I'm going to keep this real short and clarify this right away about the upflumming. What does it mean, and how does it, and case by case basis, but largely how does it work around community benefits? If I could do that real quick. I've designed this very technical drawing here. I don't know if you could see this. Okay. So let's just say, oh gosh, this is tough. Let's just say this is the current zoning right here, okay, on this side. So you have a building, it's 4 stories, okay. This would be considered like moderate density building anywhere DC, okay. That's the current zoning. Now, if a developer wants to put some more on top of that, he or she would go through a PUD process here. You get 20% on top of what you got already. Okay, that's a PUD process. What's the big deal about a PUD? A planned unit development? Well, it requires planning. It requires neighbors getting involved. It requires your ANC to discuss this. How will this affect the community? How will this density affect the community? It also requires the developer committing to binding conditions. Hey, for this density that I'm going to get as the developer, what do you guys need in terms of your community? You need more affordable housing? How about on the bottom floor, we put some local entrepreneurs, business opportunities? Oh, the jobs in this to build this project is going to go to the local people. These are binding conditions that come about through a PUD process. So what does the upflumming do? Upflumming will allow the developers to now pick from a menu of new zone districts that are much denser than what currently exists, okay? 4 stories. Now you upflum it by the council. Now the council has said, you can go bigger there. So the developer picks a zone that's much bigger, and they don't need to do a PUD anymore. This would become matter of right. No questions asked. You go to the zoning commission. The zoning commission is by law required to match the FLUM, the future land use map, with, a live DC zoning map, what every property is zoned at, to meet the new FLUM designation. This would be a medium density FLUM designation, like, 8 stories. So the developer would pick a new zone district, pro forma, in the zoning commission. People who would be opposed to this get 3 minutes to testify, but they don't have to listen to you, because by law, the zoning commission has to match the zone map, the live zoning, with the FLUM. And so they would get to build all this as a matter of right. No community promises, no benefits, no planning, just build it. That's what's at stake here with the upflumming. And when you talked about it, William, it's 200 million square feet of this around the city. I could share my screen real quick if you'd like to see that. But we don't have to get into the detail. We don't have to get into that.
Well, work on that. I wanted to go, while you're working on that, go to Renee, because I know, Renee, one of the things you've talked about a lot is the definition of affordability. And so, and trying to chase that, that around. So if you could you share a little bit on what you've learned over the last week in terms of how the city defines affordability and what it means in reality or doesn't mean?
Yes, that's really one of the seeds of our discontent, because the definition of affordability from the Office of Planning really takes all the focus off the people who need housing affordable to them the most, and that is the households who are 0 to 30% of the median income. In other words, people at the top of that category making $37,000 a year or less. And so the Office of Planning defined affordability as up to 120% of the median family income. And in 2020, that was a family of 4 making $151,000. And even though in any expensive urban city, there's certain headwinds, those are not the people who are unhoused. Those are not the people who are living in safety net housing, public housing, or the people struggling at 31 to 50% of the median family income. So the Committee of the Whole reduced that down from 120% of the median family income. And we know when I say median family income, we're talking about the Washington region, and median is half below and half above that income. So in Washington, DC, that median family income is much lower. The Committee of the Whole reduced the definition of affordable housing to up to 80% of the median family income, which means that that means that for one person, half the people make at 80% make 70,000 or below, and half the people make 70,000 above. That's for one person. For a family of 4, that's 100,000. But that's still not good enough, because the people that are suffering are the people that make up to 37,000 a year or just a little bit more. And so what we're saying is, and I was very gratified that my new council member said we need to focus on what DC Grassroots Planning Coalition is saying on the 0 to 30%, because we know that 0 to 30% is where so many people are. Because when you look at the district's median income, half the households in the district are below $42,000 a year in earnings. And so half the Black households in the district are extremely low income and very low income. And so we know that if you're building housing for people at 60 and 80% and 120%, you're not building any housing for the people who really need it. So because there's such a stark difference, I'm not even talking about wealth, I'm just talking about income, between the income of Black people in the district and the income of white people. Because as I said, the median income of Black people is $42,000 a year as of 2020, And for white families, a median household income, this is a family of 4, is 134,000. So if you're building housing that is 1,000 and 2,000 a month, and 1,500, 2,000 for a studio, you've completely shut out the people who really need the housing help. So we have to push a realistic definition of what is affordable. That's it.
All right, Chris, can you go ahead and make, are you gonna still show the point, or you have something else?
I don't think so. We could do something this week, maybe with the week of action, like a specific zoom in on the flum. But I think the main points, the main takeaways for me, and on all of this is, without accountability of the status quo, as highlighted in the core racial equity report, saying that the comp plan is racist. Without accountability of these status quo development policies, it will mean real estate interests will continue to be put first, thus exacerbating the displacement of Black and brown working residents from the city. I don't know why on Tuesday, when the council was debating this stuff or talking about it, nobody said 40,000 Black folks gone from DC between 2000 and 2010. Nobody on the dais talked about any real data right now. DC CFO data. How about 20,000 vacant units in the city right now? Why aren't the, how about over the past decade that this trickle down affordable housing inclusionary zoning program has only constructed 1,000 quote unquote affordable units, and affordable at the levels that Renee just showed us. I mean, $1,500 studios, not affordable, but the term has covered up the reality. And this is why we're in a displacement crisis. We cannot allow the council, the city planners, to ask us to sacrifice community-driven planning for less regulated, faster construction of even more unaffordable studios and 1-bedrooms. That's what they're asking us to do.
What I think we do now, even someone who, we need people to write their council members, to call their council members, and even to say that even though the narratives aren't policies and actions, but the narratives are false. The narratives that there had been 1-for-1 replacement at Ellen Wilson Dwellings and Arthur Caper. That is false. There never was. But I think also with respect to, we know that the land use element along with the maps are the most important. And the land use element deals with vacant housing, vacant lots, and the housing element deals with vacant housing. And we can highlight that for people if they want to write in for that with regard to the unhoused, because the land use element doesn't require using vacant land to house the unhoused or for housing for people who are extremely low income. They talk about vacant building inventories, and there's the provision needs to interface the vacant inventories with the housing element. The vacant inventories and the land use element needs to refer to the housing element to say that it's a priority that this must be used, this land, public land must be used to house people who need it with all the public services. And so I think there's things that we can do. We have I think there's a week of action that we're going to be doing. I know there's a week of action, and we can have different possible suggested scripts or just areas that we ask people to focus on. There's nothing in the land use element that highlights or mandates community-led development. There's some things that the chairman put in his version. When I say the chairman, the committee of the whole version that says engage communities. But what does that mean? But not have, the communities have to determine for themselves, just like the lead-in music was saying, we need a rec center. But what did McDuffie and the developers do? They wanted to build expensive market rate housing when people need a recreation center, a job training center. So we can focus on these things in highlighting why we say that the comp plan is racist. And I think now people are learning, even in their own communities. I live in Petworth. Well, now people are calling it Brightwood Park. I never heard that till about 10 years ago. But you know, until about 10, 12 years ago, it used to be mostly Black people. But now in our area, we see that when the developers asked our ANC to give us more, maybe 2 units as of right, but give us a 3rd unit, we see from out of their own mouths that it's not going to be affordable. It may be less than what they'll charge for 2 units, but still, if it's 600,000 or more, it's not affordable to anybody that that is making the salaries that most working class people make. So we need to, I think, focus now on how we can just push forward, try to push them, because we don't have much time.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is to get ready to move. I think Parisa or someone's going to come on and talk about what actions we need to take. But I think, out of this, we just wanted to make sure that, one, that people were aware that the Office of Planning submitted changes to the comp plan that was reviewed by CORE. CORE determined that those would exacerbate racial inequity, make it much, much, much worse. And our Office of Planning told us that was good, right? And so the Office of Planning needs to be held accountable for what they said. They need to explain why CORE said that their plan was inequitable, right? Then we need to look at the council, right? So CORE looked at what the council did to fix the mess that OP and the mayor submitted. And they said it's an improvement in terms of the words, in terms of even some of the processes. But they still said it would perpetuate the status quo. In the meantime, we're being forced out of, particularly Black families, being forced out of the city at alarming rates while we maintain the status quo, right? And council members are saying that it doesn't matter, or say, well, the comp plan can't fix that. So we need to know, well, then what are you going to do to fix that, right? So if you say we need legislation to do it, where's the legislation? It should be in parallel with the comp plan. How can you pass a comp plan? Says it won't solve the problem, but there is a problem unless you show the legislation. Show us something. And then I think Chris showed us that we need emergency action. We need to do something now to stop displacement. That's why we focus on the lowest income housing. We know all of us need housing. All of us need, but we know that if we don't focus on those most in need, you'll never get around to them if we focus on higher up. So we must focus on higher up. So I'm gonna turn it over to Parisa and we'll talk about what we need to do over the next 2 weeks or so before the first reading on the comp plan.
Hey everybody, good to be with you. Just quickly, the one of the things that stood out to me in the CORE report is it says that the rewrite of the comp plan in 2026 must lead with racial equity. And I would say, no, this amendment must lead with racial equity, right? So they're acknowledging all of the failures that it does, that's exacerbating racial inequities, but they're putting it off to the future to actually address it, right? And I think everything that William talked about earlier in terms of the policy that has has created gentrification and displacement over the last 20 or so years, the city is now being confronted with it, but still pushing it off to the future until they actually deal with it, right? And hoping that we forget, hoping that the comp plan, says racial equity, but it doesn't actually lead to any significant change. So we are working, of course, on specific language that we're going to be asking council members to introduce amendments around for our top priorities around low-income housing, stopping displacement, community-led development, all of these things that we've talked about. The hearing that is currently scheduled for May 4th is not a public hearing with testimony. This is the first reading where amendments will be offered by different council members, and then the council will take their first vote on the plan. It is expected that they will then finalize and take their final vote on it May 18th, although the dates could change. And so all the way up to that last point is where we need to see these amendments being offered. I think what I would love to know is if the 79 people on the call today would commit to making phone calls this week, not just emails, we'll ask for emails too, but making phone calls this week to your ward council member and all of your at-large council members. And we will send you all the information, some suggested talking points, and all the phone numbers. But if you can take time out this week to call those 5 people, the 4 at-large plus the chairman's office, 6 people, I guess, plus your ward level council member, that would be extremely helpful because, they're not going to get 80 calls, too often. And so it's important just to, as we are also internally, we're going to be meeting with some of the council offices. We're going to be talking with the chairman's office this week as well, to have your voices echoing and putting more pressure on what we're asking. So we really appreciate that commitment. We're talking about trying to do some other actions this week. We would love to highlight either through online forums and discussion or possibly an in-person action, but we need to see, where you all are at, if you have the energy for it. Miss Elliot called for us to hit the streets. There's been some discussion about possibly doing a rally or some type of event in person. So please do put in the chat if that's something that you would like to see and that you would participate in. Because, it is hard for us. We're obviously dealing with a lot of policy language that we're trying to get right. And so we're really focused on that as well. And the last thing I'll mention is that, the Grassroots Planning Coalition has been working now for 4 years. We've been meeting every month. We've got a good base of people who care about equitable development, and it doesn't stop with the comp plan. It's really just the beginning, right? So as soon as we finalize this, we're going to be coming back to you to talk about the policies that we need to push that strengthen all of the ideas in the comp plan. And we're going to be looking for you to help us develop those policies, get elected officials to champion them, to introduce them, and get them passed quickly. And, the council they'll be going into the budget stuff, after they finish the comp plan. The mayor's budget's coming out probably late May. They've pushed everything back. The budget hearings will be in June. They probably won't go on recess until maybe late July, early August, and then they'll be on recess. And we really need to come back strong in September with these policy proposals that follow up on the, we got to maintain this momentum around the comp plan, right? And this attention to land use and how that has exacerbated racial inequity in the city and what we need to do to address it. So thank you all. That's all I have for now. And again, just appreciate working with you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Teresa. That's it. Thank you everyone for joining today. Keep an eye out for emails and correspondence from us, and the fight continues.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone can unmute and say goodbye to each other.